version of it, I think, later on. I think it was good, but I think they probably went into a bit much detail about how you use a tool, like
oh right,
if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, Pip was on there as well. He emailed me, so he's joining this, but he's also on there.
What, Pip Tucker?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I'm just waiting for a few more people to trickle in, and then I'll get started. Just to let you know, I'm recording. I hope that's okay with everyone. And if you do want to turn your cameras off, if you don't want to be in the recording, then that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. I'm just expecting a couple more people, so I'll just give it 1 minute. Welcome, Lorraine. I was just saying that I'm just giving it a couple of minutes for people to join, and I'm recording as well. So if you don't want your face in the recording, then please feel free to turn your camera off.
I'm just looking at the team and seeing actually most of us are still here. Just looking at the team photo, going, oh, most of us are still here. We've got quite a few additions.
Yeah, it's quite a nice team photo, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Hi, Pip. Hi, Jake. Hi, Carly. I think we'll get started now, just to let you know that I'm recording the session. So if you don't want your face in the recording, then please feel free to turn your camera off. It's so that we can share the recording with people afterwards. I'll get started in the interest of time. So today I'm going to be talking through the Adult Active Lives survey for Somerset. So this is the latest data that we have got, which goes from November 2021 to November 2022. Feels like it's not that recent anymore because we're almost coming up to November again. But the national data comes out in kind of April, May, but the Somerset, the more local data, doesn't come out for a few months later. So that's why there's a slight delay on it. But I think this is something that we all know, but it's important for context for this data set. So we know that being physically active is really good for you, and it can contribute to our well-being, our physical health, and social and community development. At SAS, we're trying to get people active and aiming to achieve our vision of achieving healthier and happier communities in Somerset through sport and physical activity. And we do that by providing accessible opportunities, addressing inequalities, supporting clubs and communities and schools and the workforce, and also bringing together organisations and partners to create positive change around enabling active lives. I think we also probably all know that we face a lot of challenges with trying to do that, and that not all of us feel that we can be active. And I thought it'd be nice to bring in some data from elsewhere today. So the latest Activity Alliance survey found that 77% of disabled people want to be more active. So they really want to be active, but there are barriers that's preventing them from being able to be more active. The We Are Undefeatable campaign has a lot of insight behind it. There's also a similar percentage, around 70% of people who have long-term health conditions also want to be more active, but also face barriers. And the This Girl Can campaign also sees that women face barriers to being active, such as fear of judgment and lack of enjoyment. So these are the things that we're kind of facing across the board, across our residents in Somerset. But hopefully the Active Lives survey can help us with some of those things. So the Active Life survey, for those who don't know, asks people aged 16 and over across England about sport and physical activities they take part in. It first started back in November 2015. So the first year was November 2015 to November 2016. And then results were published twice a year, but now that's moved to once a year. So it's once a year in the November timeframe. There's a lot more information that can be found on Sport England's website about their methodology and what they're doing. The survey for us, how it can help us, is that it can help us measure activity levels across Somerset. It can also help us understand inequalities that exist around physical activity across our county and how these vary over time, which is one of the important things. It's not just a snapshot. We've got the trends now from 2015, which is kind of 7 years of data, which can really help us think about what's going on over time. And then we can use that information to make more decisions about what we do in Somerset to help the people that are more likely to be inactive. So what's going on for us in Somerset? So given all of that background, what we see in Somerset, here we're looking at the people in Somerset that are inactive. So that's those that are doing less than 30 minutes of physical activity per week. So we have around 23.5% of adults aged 16 and over who do less than 30 minutes a week. And when you compare that to England, it looks like we're doing a bit better than England. So the England average is 25.8%. But I think that can be a bit misleading because it can be like, right, we're doing a good job, we're doing slightly better than England. But actually, I don't think we can relax with those figures, because if we think about that in terms of the population of Somerset, that's around 130,000 people in Somerset who are more likely to have higher risk of various things such as major illness, mental health issues, lack of social connection, because they do not have the support or the opportunity to be active in a way that suits them. So it's still quite a lot of people that we're talking about here. Even though it looks like we're performing relatively well, we still don't want to see that many people across Somerset who are inactive. And I think as a collective across Somerset, we need to understand why that's happening and think about what changes we can make together. So I think it's really interesting to also see how that varies over time. So the green line at the top is those who are active. So that's doing greater than 150 minutes a week. And the black line at the bottom is those who are inactive, so doing less than 30 minutes a week. And then the grey lines are the respective national figures. As you can see, it's been relatively stable over time, so things haven't changed significantly for us in Somerset over time. We had a bit of a dip in 2017 to 18, but we recovered after that and actually held up some of the kind of activity levels, well, particularly over the first part of COVID, but fell slightly in the second part of COVID in November 20 to 21. But I think what's interesting here is that we're not seeing a lot of variation over time. It is kind of staying around the similar figures. In the last year, it's increased slightly and inactivity has decreased slightly. But it is kind of staying stable, I guess, is the point. But I think what I want to talk about today is the fact that those overall figures can only tell us so much, and they actually hide quite a lot of things that are actually going on for the people in Somerset. So one of our main aims is to tackle inequalities. So what can the Active Lives survey tell us about those inequalities that exist for people doing physical activity in our country? I think the key headline really to take away today is that everything isn't equal for everyone across Somerset. So as I showed you before, 23.5% of adults aged 16 plus are inactive. But when we look at women, that's slightly higher. So 25.1% of female adults are inactive. And then if we look at people who are in the lower socioeconomic group, so they're social grade 6 to 8, it's getting a bit higher again. So around just under a third of adults in that group are inactive. And then where it gets a lot higher is when we're starting to look at people who have long-term health conditions or have a disability. So 42% of those are inactive. And then if we look finally at those who are age 75 plus, we are getting to almost 44% of people who are inactive when they are 75 plus. So what we're seeing here is that on average across Somerset, 23.5% of people are inactive, but actually that gets a lot higher when we look at certain groups of people if they have certain characteristics. And whilst it is important to reduce that overall inactivity across Somerset, we can see here that there are groups that we probably want to work hard and focus more on to reduce that inequality and inactivity that exists for those people. So I'm going to explore each of those groups in a bit more detail now and how they might relate to each other as well, which is also important. So for women, what we've seen here and what I will talk about in all of these graphs are the percentage of people that are inactive, so doing less than 30 minutes of physical activity a week. So the main thing here really is we want to see lower figures. So we want these figures as low as possible. For women here, you can see that the trend for both men and women has been relatively stable over time. We're seeing it falling slightly over time for women, but for men it's increased a bit and then it's fallen kind of back to what it was 7 years ago. What's I guess more important is that there's been a gap, quite a stubborn gap between genders for activity levels that's existed throughout the whole period. So females have always been more inactive than males, and we haven't seen that go away. We saw it close and get a lot closer together during COVID, actually, in Somerset. And that was primarily due to males becoming more inactive rather than females becoming less inactive. So the figures for females kind of stayed relatively stable, whereas those men became a bit more inactive. But that gap has started to reappear again in the latest data, so it's around 4% now. As I mentioned earlier, this girl Can has lots of research on why that might be the case, and it's often around things like fear of judgment, relating to ability and appearance and priorities, but also around an enjoyment gap. So fewer women agreeing that they find sport or physical activity enjoyable than men do. So it's thinking about what we can do around those areas to help remove this gap. Social grade, so those who belong to the highest social economic group, that's the dark green one at the bottom. And what we've seen over time for them is that has been a slow and steady decrease in inactivity. And that's one of the groups that we have seen most obviously have that slow and steady decrease. So those who have got higher, in the highest socioeconomic groups, have seen inactivity fall. But we haven't seen a similar change for those in the middle groups. That's the light green. That's been really stable, so that really hasn't changed much. It's gone up very, very slightly, but it's very much flat for the middle socioeconomic group. But what we are seeing is that those in the lowest socioeconomic group, the light blue line, and those are people who are in routine or semi-routine jobs, long-term unemployed or who have never worked. We're seeing a lot of fluctuation in inactivity for those people. So if you look at the general trend, it's kind of going up, but you're seeing peaks and troughs and it's really fluctuating. These fluctuations are not something we're seeing at a national level. There we see a gradual trend of increasing inactivity for this group. So it'd be really interesting to explore what we think might be going on for this group. What is it that is causing those fluctuations? Is it external factors? Is it that often these people have got a lot going on, other stresses and strains that might mean that they dip in and out of physical activity? So exploring that more, I think, would be really interesting. So long-term health conditions and or disabilities. The light green line are those people who have a long-term health condition and or a disability, and the dark green line is those that do not. Adults in Somerset, I think this is a really quite a stark statistic, is that those who have a long-term health condition and or a disability are over twice as likely to be inactive than those that do not. So we're seeing that 42% of those with a disability or long-term health condition are inactive, whereas those who do not have that are 17.6%. Similar to the gender issue, we've seen that gap, and that gap exists over time. There are points that it's become smaller, but it's kind of widened again, and it's very similar to what it was 7 years ago. And the Activity Alliance do a survey every year to kind of give us more detail and a bit more in-depth information on those people who are living with a disability around physical activity, and it's really a primary source of insight for organisations that want to achieve fairness for people with disabilities in sport and activity. And I think the results this year were quite interesting and highlighted a lot of things that perhaps are going on here. They kind of showcase that we're not seeing enough positive trends in disabled people's perceptions and experiences of being active, and that there is a greater effort needed to tackle inequalities that affect disabled people, especially to reduce loneliness and the impact of the rising cost of living. So that cost of living has really impacted disabled people significantly more than those without disabilities. So those things are something to think about as well when we're considering this data. So next up, we're looking at age. So I think what's interesting with age is that, so the dark blue is those who are 75 plus. And actually what we've seen over time is a downward trend in inactivity. So it's going down, which is a good thing, but it's still significantly higher than everyone else. So whilst we are seeing a decrease in inactivity for that group, the gap is still so big. And so it's thinking about how we might reduce that gap quicker, or other ways that we can think about supporting that group. This is also something that we've seen across England too. So we see inactivity reducing for that group over time. And actually, it's a very similar amount that it's reduced by, but still the huge gap between that age group and everyone else. The fluctuations we are seeing for our 16 to 34-year-olds, so that's the dark green line. So again, we've got kind of ups and downs, which you'll kind of see is a bit similar to those from the lower socioeconomic groups. We're not really seeing that at a national level. There we see a gradual increasing trend actually for inactivity for that age group. So something that we're seeing for 16 to 34-year-olds is not necessarily what we're seeing nationally. And the 55 to 74-year-olds, which are the light blue ones, tend to be relatively stable. They've kind of been slowly decreasing, but then it increased slightly during COVID and started to decrease again. So I think the key message from this slide is that whilst inactivity is reducing for 75 plus, it's still much higher than everyone else. And we're seeing some fluctuations going on for those in the younger age group. So understanding why that might be is important. I think it's really important to note here that you can often get down into a bit of a siloing exercise where you just look at women, or you just look at people in lower socioeconomic groups, or you just look at older people, but actually no one person is any of one of those things. So we really can't look at those in isolation, and there's no one characteristic that would define whether someone is physically active or not. We all have intersectionalities, and it's important to understand those and how having more than having different intersectionalities can perhaps have a greater impact on our ability or desire to be active, or can mean that we face greater barriers to doing those. So I think it's important to think about those things when looking at this information as well. So I've explored this in a bit more detail with a couple of examples. So when I was looking at those fluctuations in activity levels of those aged 16 to 34, I also saw a very similar pattern for those in the lower socioeconomic group. So I wanted to explore what was going on there. So we had 15.8% of adults aged 16 to 34 who are inactive in Somerset, which, as you can see, is quite a lot lower than what we saw on average across Somerset, which was around 25%. So actually, this group is a relatively active group. But when you explore that in a bit more detail, you can see that the socioeconomic group has quite a big impact on that figure. So if you're in a higher socioeconomic group and you are 16 to 34, you're actually half as likely to be inactive. So you're much more likely to be active if you are in a higher socioeconomic group. Only 7.2% of those are inactive. But if you happen to be in a lower socioeconomic group, then you're actually twice as likely to be inactive. So if you are 16 to 34 and you happen to be in a lower socioeconomic group, just having those two characteristics together means you're twice as likely to be inactive than the kind of average 16 to 34-year-old, which takes you to 29.6%. But when you're looking at those in the higher socioeconomic groups of that age group and the lower, you're comparing 7.2% to 29.6%, which is a huge, huge gap. That's a massive gap for people who are in that age group. So this tells us that those in that age group are affected quite a lot by their socioeconomic status. I have explored it for the other age groups, and we do see some difference, but just not to the same extent as we do for this age group. So it's really interesting to think about what is going on here. Is it that they're at the start of their careers and that you're in the lower socioeconomic group, you may have a lot less disposable income to spend on physical activity? Do you think there's more of a wider difference between income from those two groups and perhaps wider than at other ages? Or are they a group that perhaps have quite a lot going on? So starting a career, buying a house, starting a family, there's a lot going on. Are those things that might affect it as well? So it's really thinking about what is it about those two characteristics together that's leading to this huge disparity in activity, and how can we explore that a bit further? Something else that we see is that being 75 plus, you are already very likely to be inactive. So 43.9% of people who are of that age are inactive, which, as we showed you before, is significantly higher than any other age group. But actually, and also having a long-term health condition or a disability means you're much more likely to be inactive than the average person. But what happens if you have both of those things? Well, what happens is you end up having 60% of people who are 75 plus and have a long-term health condition or disability are inactive, which is double the amount of that group of people that are active. We only see around 28% of people of that group who are active. So again, what we're seeing here is like when we have more than one of those characteristics added together, we're seeing an even greater chance of inactivity. And here it's quite stark, because we're seeing over half of people with that group who are inactive, also much more likely to be inactive than active. So that means the additional needs of having a long-term health condition or a disability leads to a much greater chance of being inactive when you are of that age group. Again, we see that for different age groups as well, that having a long-term health condition or a disability makes you more inactive, but it's even greater for this age group in particular, for the older age group. I'm now going to explore a bit around our places. So for local authority, we can get the data by local authority. Obviously, we have now gone unitary. So this data we can only have now for this time period. In the next data set, we will just have one Somerset figure, so we won't have it split down by these 4 local authorities. I think what's interesting to note here is that there are fluctuations in inactivity levels across all of the local authorities. We're seeing a slight decrease in inactivity since 2015, but we have seen some trends that kind of stuck around over time. Sedgemoor has tended to be the most inactive local authority and was really impacted actually by COVID. It's kind of got back to, it's kind of caught up with everyone a bit in the last year, but it will be interesting to see what happens. It would be interesting to see, sorry, if we got that data, what would happen over time for that. And Mendip tends to be the most active and the least inactive, so the dark green line at the bottom. Whilst I say that we will no longer get data by local authority when we get the national data sets, Sport England are looking at developing small area estimates. So that's where they estimate activity levels in small areas. So MSOA and LSOA output areas, which are different definitions of a size of a place based on kind of population size. And we will get those figures hopefully by the end of the year, where we can then explore activity and inactivity levels at a more granular level in our places in Somerset. They're also hoping to publish those alongside a tool which allows you to look at other data alongside the inactivity data. So things, for example, like IMD. So once that is available, I will also do a session on that to show everyone around that and see what you can do with that. Types of activity. So something that the Active Live survey also does is ask people what they do. And it's a very interesting insight into what different groups of people are up to in terms of how they get their physical activity minutes. We continue to see walking as the most popular type of activity taken part by our residents, and it really increased from 2018 onwards, and it's kind of stayed at that high level. We're seeing over the whole period, we've seen more downward trends for active travel, fitness, swimming and team sports, but those all seem to be reversing in the last year. We're yet to see if that's a long-term trend, but they have seen upticks in the last year. So that's a good sign for those 4 groups. However, cycling and running continue to fall, particularly running. We've seen a huge fall in the percentage of people that say that they're running. And cycling has gradually fallen since 2019. When we have been looking at this, when thinking about tackling inequalities, walking continues to be the most popular activity for women and for those who are age 75 plus. And we're actually seeing fitness activities being really popular for the 75 plus age group. We are seeing the fall in running and cycling being particularly affecting women. So women are kind of moving away from those 2 activities. And when we look at lower socioeconomic groups compared to higher socioeconomic groups, what surprised me when I looked at this data was that we're seeing the biggest gaps in the percentage that take part for walking and running. So actually those, if you were in a higher socioeconomic group, around 63% walk, whereas only 46% walk if you're in a lower socioeconomic group. And we're seeing around double the percentage of people who are in a higher socioeconomic group run than those who are in the lower socioeconomic group. And areas where you would perhaps expect to see a greater gap between those 2 things, perhaps due to what we would expect to be a more expensive activity to do, we're just not seeing those gaps. So for example, swimming and cycling and team sports, we're actually seeing very similar percentages of people taking part in those activities, whether they're in a higher or a lower socioeconomic group. And actually for team sports, we're seeing more people higher percentage take part who are in a lower socioeconomic group than those who are in a higher socioeconomic group, even though it's very similar figures. So I think for me that was quite surprising, perhaps, that some of those activities that perhaps you would see as associated as being higher cost, we're not seeing that difference by higher or lower socioeconomic groups. So I'm now going to move more into kind of what do we want to see and where are we going with this, and hopefully have a chance for a bit of a chat at the end. So we have all of this insight on what are we looking for and what change do we hope to see. So as I said before, we want healthier and happier communities in Somerset through physical activity and sport. And essentially what that means is that we want activity levels to improve, we want inactivity to fall, and we want inequality to fall. And I think inequality is kind of up to us to work out what that means for us and what types of inequality we want to focus on and narrow. We are obviously doing so much already to try and achieve these three things. And in our impact report, we kind of show some of the examples of what we're doing. The Together Fund is a great example of where we've been trying to reduce inequalities across Somerset, across 4 different groups, including long-term health conditions and/or disability and lower socioeconomic groups. We've been trying to embed physical activity in primary and secondary prevention through health and wellbeing coaches. We've also been working with that age group, 16 to 25-year-olds, and as I showed you before, the importance of working with that group who are also are in lower socioeconomic groups. We're trying to offer free access to preventative moving through enhanced access. Our free health walks are expanding every day across Somerset. And then we also have a whole host of campaigns that support specific groups, like the In It Together campaign, which is around women, and We Are Undefeatable. I think what would be interesting though is thinking about what else we can do to get there with tackling some of these inequalities. So here are some ideas that I've been thinking about. So we could work out where these inequalities are. So using those small area estimates that I mentioned can help us really understand. So we know that women and those in lower socioeconomic groups and those with long-term health conditions and those who are older face greater chances of being inactive, but where are these people, and what is it about them that's stopping them from being active? So first of all, it's working out where they are, using those small area estimates when they come out towards the end of the year to see, is there pockets of areas in Somerset that we're seeing face greater inequalities than others? And then it's around going out and talking to those people and thinking about what is it that's stopping them from being active and how can we help? What is it that we can do to support these people to help move them more towards activity? And we can also use this insight to talk to partners and design services that can help tackle inequalities based on this data, based on where the inequalities are, based on talking to people. How can we use all that information to then design services that help support these people? So we've got about 10 minutes left, and now I thought it would be a chance to hear what people think. So what do you think about the presentation today? What do you think is driving some of this information? What could we do about it? And what's next for us? So would anyone like to?
Annabelle, I can't find, I don't know if there's a hand to put up in Zoom. I tend to use Teams and I can't find anything. So it's Pip Tuck here at the Public Health. Hello, that was great. That was really, really good. And I've got a comment and a question. The first question is whole story was completely coherent. You know, everything you described, differences between different people, and it made complete sense. And what was really good was to see the split. You know, you talked about age and income, for example, you know, as factors together, because I think we've got to understand how these all fit together. But obviously, the more you split this down, the smaller the numbers. And I'm just wondering, is there any way of presenting the information with kind of error bars or something like that would give an idea of, you know, how much is something that really looks like a big difference? Because everything you described made complete sense, but it might just be that we're comparing, well, I don't know, you know, very small numbers and reading something into it that isn't there. So that's kind of my main point. The other one, that's totally different one, is the walking. I just wonder how much of that is dog walking.
Yeah.
Because there was so many people have dogs since the pandemic, and I'm just wondering whether that's maintained because people have to take the dog out.
I mean, that's a very good point about the dog one. I don't think they ask if it's dog walking or not. So I can comment on that. But yeah, it's something I see a lot where I live, a lot of people with dogs. On your first point, yes, we have all the data with confidence intervals, and if it's statistically significant, the difference. The things that I've presented today are, and that's why I didn't go into more detail or split it more for other age groups, for example, or other ones. But yes, it's definitely possible to put that in the presentation.
I think, to be honest, if you just said at the beginning these are statistically significant, then it would have, you know, that's why they make sense, because they're big differences that matter. So that's great. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Pip.
Hi, Annabelle. It's Lorraine.
Hi, Lorraine. Nice to see you.
Hi. Nice to see you too. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting and great to understand a little bit more about the demographics for Somerset. Really fantastic that you use some of our data in there as well. And I think for me, what I picked out on that is kind of looking at that over 75 statistic as well, that was quite stark, and the kind of multiple health conditions or impairments, kind of how that increases. And I know that you're probably, you know, you're very aware of our research because we had that conversation the other day. I was kind of picking out the one that we published recently around the 93% of people with a long-term health condition had more than one other impairment. And kind of that's compared to 77% of disabled people overall. And I think for me, also, I kind of had a quick look through some of our research, and there's definitely that link with healthcare providers and the confidence around kind of people with, especially with mobility issues. They're actually much more likely than other disabled people to say that they listen to that advice from GP or doctors or nurses, and that was, and physios and occupational therapists. So I think that, yeah, just looking at that data with you guys also, and what we've done nationally, and then looking at that demographic of that you're saying people over 75, multiple impairments, there's probably some stuff there as well around like conversations and opening up conversations, and like the support maybe that can go towards the healthcare professionals, like those people to be able to have more confidence, or the signposting around physical activity. So I thought it was great, and I'll be really interested to kind of take forward, you know, to chat to you about other ideas about how you tackle that, and maybe some of the support that we've got as an organisation that we could give you to do some of that stuff. So, but just wanted to say thank you, and it was really interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be really great. Thank you, Lorraine. I have to say all of your annual survey stuff was very helpful, and definitely put more context into the data that we were finding, but also will help us think about what to do next, like the actions, like you said, around the healthcare professionals. I think that came up at the engagement day last week as well. Someone mentioned that as well.
Yeah, it did definitely. And we're doing a lot of work within the health field as well at the moment, which is really interesting, and doing a lot, we've got some webinars coming up. But I think the impairment specific report that's just come out could be really great also for some of your partners within the region to really look into like particular impairment types and like the statistics against what people are saying within, that have got those impairments. So yeah,
that would be really great, because the active life survey, they ask if you have how many impairments you have, so if you have multiple impairments, but it doesn't go into the detail of what they are. So actually that information would be definitely really helpful, I think, for our team, for Carly and Jane in our team.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, Lorraine. Jake, you've found out how to put your hand up.
Oh yeah, it took me a while. It's been a while since I've been on Zoom. No, thank you for that. Really interesting as always. I guess it's more of an observation really, and around that 16 to 34-year-old age group. And I think the one thing that sort of really stood out for me was around that lower socioeconomic group being twice as likely to be inactive. And I think then coupled with that, with the fact that when you sort of drill down into the activity, that it was that they weren't necessarily interested in the free activity. So like walking and running, which indicates that price isn't necessarily a barrier, which I think we have thought before that it might be. And I guess for me, I think there is a real need to talk to that group to understand what some of the real issues are, because actually I think there is a perception within the sector that cost is often a barrier, but that indicates, and I know it's, and it's a fairly still small sample size, but I'd be keen to drill down into that, because I think that is quite a startling statistic.
Yeah, and I have to say it did surprise me when I was looking at it, that I was kind of expecting higher cost activities and lower socioeconomic groups to have a different relationship. And I don't know, perhaps it's something because we've focused on the cost so much that actually there is a lot of like things for people to do in that group. In sports clubs, for example, there are spaces for them, and actually the free activities we just kind of assume people go along to, and actually that's maybe not what's happening. And perhaps it's not cost that's the issue, as you said, it's something else that's going on. Jane, you've got your hand up.
Well, Jake stole my point in reality. I'm gonna go.
Actually, got your hand up first.
I know it should have been a race, I know, but I am going to go to the opposite end, just because it is in mind at the moment. So I'm interested in that 75 plus. So we're just about to do work with hospital discharge and falls prevention, and I'm really interested in whether when we activate people, whether they actually realise they're being active, whether they deem it, recognise that actually some of that is activity, because maybe at 75 they think being active is going to a class or a whatever. And I'm just interested in, given that we have a whole cohort of health coaches and are going to be doing hospital discharge, actually whether we need to talk about what that actually is for older people, rather than just assume that they understand what being active is. It was a comment, not really, but interesting for me, because I do think that there's some confusion in their heads that being active might be playing sport or going to a class, rather than doing chair-based exercise or just walking their dogs.
Do you feel like that's something that's just for that age group though, or do you think that's something that other people might feel as well about what they define as being active?
I suspect it's across that, but I think that 75 when you talk to 75-year-olds and over, they don't think that they need to be active anymore. They go, oh yeah, I'm waiting for God now. You know, they honestly, they don't really think about activity levels are for children, and that's what you hear, you know, again and again and again. Well, you know, you're banging on about me, but you know, I'm all right, Jack, and you know, so yeah, I think it's more in my insight. So my gut tells me that it's more, but I don't have obviously any data for that. I always have to be careful how I speak to Annabelle. She always challenge me.
Thanks for that, Jane. Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments on what we found this time around?
Annabelle, just on the back of what Jane has just said, I think there's some of those nationally, some conversations that need to happen around what it is, what being active is. This actually came up in our meeting yesterday, where we were talking about people that have got severe kind of mobility issues, and they might be in, you know, a chair, a motorized chair, and they can't move a lot. And is actually like, so movement for them is very, very different, and it's that understanding around that it might be spending time on a gaming machine, because that is how they're expelling kind of their energy, and that is how that particular person can be active. So I think having those, saying that you're going to do that deeper dive into communities, and whatever demographic that is, I think is key to understanding what being active is for people. And nationally, I think there's some influencing there that we need to do with Sport England around also what it is to be active, because it is always based around sport and physical activity, and that's not always what it means to people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thanks, Lorraine. Jack, hello, welcome. Look at that sunshine.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, just to build on those 2 points, really. You know, in terms of talking, especially to the older community as well, it's not, obviously it is about providing those opportunities that aren't, you know, gym classes and you know, running, things like that, but it's also about how we communicate physical activity, how we do our physical activity messaging as well, because a lot of the time, you know, you see, say through mainstream media like the Guardian articles, BBC News, or anything like that, anything to do with physical activity is always a gym class, or it's always someone squatting or deadlifting. So it's, I think as well, you know, as part of those conversations with particularly the older community, it's about using what they want to frame off as physical activity messaging as well. And it kind of goes across then to show, you know, that it isn't all about going for a run or squatting 200 kilos in the gym. It's, you know, when you reach a certain age as well, carrying shopping bags will count as your physical activity.
Yeah.
So I think it's using those conversations to inform not just the opportunities that we might provide, but also how we frame our messaging.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Thanks, Jack. And I think on the almost like the flip side to that as well, when we're collecting data through the Sport England Active Live survey, it's like people saying what activities they're doing, and it's categorized, and you know, the categories are like walking, team sports, fitness activities, and part of that is like the way that they categorize it. But is it missing out on some of those things, and are people reporting that they're doing those things, or don't feel like they can say those things? Thanks for that, Jack. Does anyone else have any thoughts before we finish? Steve, oh, is that a clap? I thought it was a hands up. Oh, is it a hands up or is it a clap, Steve?
Putting all the emojis on, I couldn't work out. Not much of a observation. I guess more of a question, just in terms of ethnicity and whether that has an impact on any of those inactivity and activity levels. I know we've obviously got a relatively small population, but yeah, just in terms of whether that has an impact on any of those groups, and yeah, some of the things that you've mentioned.
Yeah, so actually what we find with our Somerset level data is that we don't have enough data from people of different ethnicities to be able to say anything, or to say anything with any kind of confidence, because we have such a high proportion of people who are white. So I think on the ethnicity point for us, it's more about finding out that information in another way. So how can we talk to our communities to work out what their activity levels are, because unfortunately we can't get that at a Somerset level. You can get it at a national level, but Somerset we're quite different to the kind of national average and some of the other areas of the UK. So yeah, I think it's more around us going out and talking to our communities where we might be able to get that information, Steve.
Thank you. That's what I thought. And just on Jake's point as well, in terms of the 16 to 34-year-olds, again, whether gender had increased that figure, I'm guessing it would for women or for females within that low social economic group. That 30% were inactive. I'm guessing it would be slightly higher for females as well within that group.
Yeah, so it was slightly higher. A similar kind of difference between what we saw from the average, from I think it went from 25% to 27% or something from average to females. It was kind of a similar, smaller increase. But yeah, as I said, the biggest increase was when you added in the lower socioeconomic groups. That had a bigger impact than if you added in gender.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you for joining, everyone. The recording will be available. I put it on our website and also the slides. And if you have any thoughts or questions afterwards, then it'd be great to chat to you, and feel free to share as well widely. And Lorraine, Steve, Pip, Jack, if you ever want to have a further conversation about what we've spoken about, that would be really great. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks, Annabelle.
Thanks, Annabelle.
Thanks, Annabelle.